Imagine standing on the deck of a massive industrial ship off the coast of the East China Sea. The air is thick with salt and the engine hums beneath your boots. Behind you, thousands of blue plastic crates are stacked high, each one vibrating with a strange, scuttling energy. At a signal from the captain, the crew begins a process that looks like something out of a surreal nature documentary. They aren't hauling nets in, they are pouring things out. Millions of tiny juvenile crabs are cascading over the side, hitting the water like a living tidal wave. China has just launched one of the most aggressive marine restoration projects in history, releasing 10 million crabs into coastal waters that were once considered beyond saving. Most experts predicted it would be a total disaster, a waste of resources in a polluted environment. But what happened next didn't just surprise the scientists. It completely upended our understanding of how quickly an ocean ecosystem can heal itself. Today, we are looking at the Great Crab Experiment and the unbelievable ripple effect that is transforming the seabed of East Asia. To understand why this was such a gamble, you have to look at the state of China's coastal waters over the last 40 years. Rapid industrialization turned these once thriving zones into what ecologists call deserts of the sea. Overfishing had wiped out the predators, while industrial runoff had fueled massive algae blooms that choked the oxygen out of the water. The delicate balance was gone. The seagrass was vanishing, the shellfish were struggling, and the local fishing communities were watching their livelihoods evaporate. For a long time, the traditional response was to build massive seawalls or try to filter the water with chemicals. But in a radical shift, the Chinese Academy of Fishery Sciences decided to try something different. They wanted to use biology as their primary tool. They wanted to see if a single species, if introduced in massive enough numbers, could act as a biological free-set button for the entire coast. The species they chose was the Portunus trituberculatus, better known as the Gazami crab or the swimming crab. These aren't just any crabs. They are the garbage collectors of the ocean. They are scavengers that eat almost anything, from decaying organic matter to small pests that thrive in polluted water. But more importantly, they are incredible engineers. As they scuttle across the seafloor, they constantly stir up the sediment. This process, called bioturbation, is vital for the health of the ocean floor. It prevents the mud from becoming toxic and helps oxygenate the soil where seagrass needs to grow. By releasing 10 million of these creatures, China wasn't just trying to boost the crab population. They were trying to deploy a 10 million-strong army of tiny gardeners to fix the seabed. When the project was first announced, the skepticism was deafening. Biologists from around the world argued that the water quality was too poor for the juvenile crabs to survive. They feared that the young crabs would either be eaten immediately by the few remaining predators or, more likely, simply succumb to the lack of oxygen on the floor. Others worried that such a massive influx of a single species would create an ecological imbalance, potentially harming other struggling organisms. But the Chinese team had a plan. They didn't just dump the crabs and hope for the best. They used satellite data to identify pockets of life, small areas where the water quality was slightly better, and used these as staging grounds. They released the crabs in waves, timed perfectly with the local currents to maximize their dispersal. For the first few weeks, it seemed like the skeptics were right. Monitoring divers reported seeing very little activity. The ocean floor remained silent. But then, about 3 months in, the data began to shift. It started with the oxygen levels. Sensors placed on the seabed showed a steady, unexpected rise in dissolved oxygen. When the divers went back down, they were stunned. The silt on the floor, which had been a dark, suffocating gray for years, was starting to turn a healthy brown. The millions of crabs had survived, and they were working. By constantly digging and moving, they were breaking up the dead zone of the sediment, allowing the water to circulate and the life-giving oxygen to penetrate deep into the mud. But that was just the beginning. The real shocker was the seagrass. For decades, seagrass beds in these coastal waters had been disappearing. Seagrass is the rainforest of the sea. It provides oxygen, stabilizes the coast, and serves as a nursery for thousands of species. Without it, the ocean is basically a desert. Scientists had tried for years to replant seagrass by hand, but it almost always failed because the sediment was too unstable and too toxic. However, with the crabs acting as natural tillers, the environment changed. The stirring of the mud released trapped nutrients in just the right amounts. Suddenly, the dormant seeds of ancient seagrass meadows, some of which had been buried for 20 years, began to sprout. Within 6 months, What was once a barren, muddy wasteland was becoming a lush underwater prairie. As the seagrass returned, the unbelievable started to happen. The ecosystem began to rebuild itself in a literal chain reaction. Small shrimp and tiny fish, which had been absent for a generation, suddenly had a place to hide and feed. This attracted larger fish, and for the first time in years, dolphins were spotted chasing schools of mackerel just a few miles from the industrial ports. The 10 million crabs hadn't just survived. They had jump-started an entire biological engine. It was proof of a concept that many in the nature recovery community had dreamed of: the keystone effect. If you pick the right species and introduce them with enough scale, they will do the heavy lifting for you. The impact on the local fishing communities has been nothing short of a miracle. For years, these villages were in decline, with young people moving to the cities because there were no fish left to catch. But with the return of the seagrass and the revival of the food chain, the yield of the coastal waters has skyrocketed. The government implemented a strict smart fishing zone, where local fishermen are given quotas and trained on how to protect the new seagrass beds. Instead of scraping the bottom with destructive nets, they are using sustainable traps. They aren't just catching crabs. They are catching high-value fish that haven't been seen in the markets for 40 years. The dying coastal waters are now some of the most productive maritime zones in the region. But how did they manage to produce 10 million crabs in the first place? This is a feat of industrial biology. China built massive super nurseries, giant inland tank systems where the water conditions are perfectly controlled. They use genetic mapping to select the hardiest crabs, the ones most likely to survive in the tough coastal conditions. They fed them a specialized diet to ensure they had the maximum energy reserves before being released. It's a marriage of high-tech aquaculture and environmental restoration. This wasn't a fact-to-nature project in the traditional sense. It was Nature 2.0. A managed, engineered recovery that used every tool in the modern scientific arsenal. One of the most fascinating aspects of the project was the use of acoustic monitoring. Scientists placed underwater microphones across the release zones to listen to the sound of the ocean. A healthy ocean is a noisy place. You have the clicking of shrimp, the grunting of fish, and the scuttling of crabs. A dying ocean is silent. Before the release, the recordings were eerie in their stillness. But as the crab population took hold, and the other species followed, the soundscape transformed. The recordings now sound like a crowded city, a cacophony of life that serves as a real-time monitor of the project's success. It's a way for researchers to hear the health of the ocean without ever having to get their feet wet. The project also had an unexpected benefit for carbon sequestration. We often talk about planting trees to fight climate change, but seagrass is actually way more efficient at capturing carbon. By restoring these underwater meadows, the 10 million crabs have helped create a massive blue carbon sink. These coastal zones are now pulling millions of tons of CO2 out of the atmosphere every year. It turns out that a crab-filled ocean isn't just good for the fish. It's a vital tool in the global effort to stabilize our climate. This has caught the attention of international climate organizations, who are now looking at marine rewilding as a key strategy for the future. However, the team in China is the first to admit that this isn't a one-and-done solution. Releasing 10 million crabs is a great start, but keeping them alive and ensuring the ecosystem remains stable requires constant vigilance. They are now using AI-powered drones to monitor the water quality and ensure that industrial runoff doesn't undo the hard work of the crabs. They've created underwater robots that can plant supplementary seagrass in areas where it's struggling to take hold. They are treating the coast like a high-tech garden, where the crabs are the primary workers and the scientists are the head gardeners. What happened in China has sparked a global conversation. Countries from Europe to North America are now looking at their own dead zones and wondering if a similar approach could work. In the Gulf of Mexico, there are talks about using specific types of oysters and shrimp to achieve the same reboot effect. In the North Sea, researchers are looking at lobsters and sea urchins. The lesson from the 10 million crabs is simple. Nature is incredibly resilient if you give it a big enough nudge in the right direction. We don't have to just sit back and watch the oceans fade away. We have the tools to bring them back. The sheer scale of the operation is hard to wrap your head around. Imagine the logistics of transporting 10 million living, breathing juveniles and coordinating their release across hundreds of miles of coastline. It's a mega project in every sense of the word. But unlike a bridge or a skyscraper, this is a project that grows and evolves on its own. The 10 million crabs are now hundreds of millions as the original pioneers have started to breed. The crab tsunami is now a permanent feature of the coast, a self-sustaining force of nature that continues to clean and repair the ocean every single day. One of the most beautiful outcomes of the project is the return of the Sea of Sparkle. In a healthy, biodiverse ocean, certain types of plankton thrive that produce bioluminescence. For decades, the coastal waters of China were too imbalanced for these organisms to survive. But recently, for the first time in nearly half a century, the waves have started to glow bright blue again at night. People are flocking to the beaches to see the liquid stars. It's a powerful, visual reminder that the water isn't just not dying anymore, it is vibrantly, brilliantly alive. But let's talk about the biological intelligence of the crabs themselves. One thing researchers didn't expect was how the crabs would organize their work. They noticed that the crabs didn't just spread out randomly. They formed high-density clusters in the areas where the mud was the most toxic. It's as if they could sense where they were needed most. These clusters worked like cleaning stations, rapidly deoxygenating an area before moving on to the next. This collective behavior, which scientists call swarm intelligence, made the restoration much more efficient than if the crabs had just moved solo. It's a reminder that even the simplest creatures have an incredible capacity for complex, beneficial behavior if they are given the right environment. The economic ripple effect has extended far beyond the fishing villages. A new ecotourism industry has sprung up along the coast. People are coming to see the dolphins, to snorkel in the new seagrass meadows, and to witness the incredible recovery for themselves. This has created a new incentive for local governments to protect the water. Previously, the only way to make money was through heavy industry. Now they are realizing that a clean, healthy ocean is a much bigger and more sustainable goldmine. The 10 million crabs have basically rewritten the economic map of the region. As we look to the future, the Aisena crab model is being refined. They are now experimenting with different species combinations, adding specific types of snails and sea cucumbers to the mix to handle different types of pollutants. They are building artificial reefs made of sustainable materials to give the crabs more places to hide and breed. The goal is to create a fully integrated, biomanaged coastal zone that can withstand the pressures of the 21st century. It's a vision of a world. The unbelievable part of this story isn't just that the crabs survived, it's that we as humans finally stopped trying to dominate the ocean and started trying to partner with it. We realized that we couldn't engineer our way out of a dying ocean with concrete and pumps. We needed the crabs. We needed the seagrass. We needed the natural processes that have been working for millions of years. The 10 million crabs were just our way of saying sorry and giving nature the boost it needed to take over again. Think about the psychological shift this represents. For so long, the news about the environment has been a story of decline. We are told that the oceans are warming, the reefs are bleaching, and the fish are vanishing. But here is a story of explosive growth and rapid recovery. It proves that the tipping point works both ways. Just as an ecosystem can collapse quickly if it's pushed too far, it can also recover with shocking speed if it's supported correctly. The dying waters of China didn't need 100 years to heal. They needed 10 million crabs and 6 months of breathing room. This discovery has changed the way we think about active restoration. Previously, many environmentalists believed in passive restoration. Just leave nature alone and it will fix itself. But in many parts of our modern world, the damage is too deep for nature to fix solo. The active approach, where we intervene on a massive scale to kickstart the process, is proving to be much more effective for our current crisis. The 10 million crabs are a symbol of this new, proactive environmentalism. We aren't just spectators of the planet's decline, we are the pilots of its recovery. As we move forward, there will be more unbelievable stories like this. We are seeing similar projects with oysters in New York Harbor, with kelp forests in Australia, and with coral gardening in the Caribbean. We are entering an era of the Great Repair. The $50 million China spent on the crab project might seem like a lot, but how do you value the return of the dolphins? How do you value the cooling of the local climate or the revival of a 1,000-year-old fishing culture? These are the real dividends of an investment in life. The next time you see a crab on a beach or in a market, take a second to appreciate the incredible work its cousins are doing in the East China Sea. Those scuttling claws are the tools of a revolution. They are the gardeners of the abyss, silent workers who are proving that no ocean is ever truly lost. The story of the 10 million crabs is a story of hope, of science, and of the incredible power of life to find a way. The nobody expected part of the headline is a testament to our own lack of imagination. We often underestimate the power of nature to heal when we give it a chance. We see a dead zone and we assume it's gone forever. But the crabs knew better. They just needed us to get them to the right spot and let them go. The result is an ocean that is brighter, louder, and more alive than anyone thought possible in our lifetime. As the sun sets over the East China Sea, the glowing waves are a beacon of what's possible. The 10 million crabs are still there, deep in the seagrass, digging, oxygenating, and thriving. They have transformed a graveyard into a nursery. They have turned a disaster into a blueprint. And as the millions become billions, the Great Crab Experiment will go down in history as the moment we realized that the best way to save the world is to let the world save itself, with a little bit of help from 10 million friends with claws. This is the future of conservation. It's big, it's bold, and it's unapologetically biological. It's an era where we use our industrial power not to pull things out of the earth, but to put life back into it. The coastal waters of China were just the beginning. The next 10 million might be oysters, or they might be sea turtles, or they might be millions of trees in a desert. Whatever the species, the lesson remains. When we invest in nature, the returns are always more than we ever expected. Stay curious, stay hopeful, and keep an eye on the water. There's a lot more happening under the surface than you think. The crab tsunami is just the first wave of a global movement to repair our beautiful, resilient planet, one claw at a time.